So we have this setup of we have the three full service legal services programs. So we have the smaller agencies and we have the statewide hotline and brief advice. In the full service programs, we provide everything from referrals to brief advice to full representation in all of the courts and various administrative proceedings. And each of us is a private nonprofit entity providing legal services to low-income people in crisis in a variety of substantive areas, including immigration. So our other work ranges from getting restraining orders for domestic violence victims, to protecting elderly people from unfair evictions, to ensuring that special needs students get a good education. And when a client comes to us, they're usually focused on the crisis du jour, what is immediately facing them or their families. Maybe it's housing, maybe it's safety. So we help with that issue, but we also do what we call a legal needs checkup. So we often identify problems that clients don't realize have a legal solution. For example, someone might come to us talking about an eviction issue, but in the course of our intake, we also discover that they're unable to make really important medically necessary legal appointments because they can't find transportation that accommodates their wheelchair, and they don't realize that they're entitled to that kind of transportation. So we do a legal checkup. We ask about safety, we ask about access to food, we ask how the kids are doing in school, we ask about medical care. We ask a variety of questions to determine if there are other areas in which we can help them with our legal services. And each of us serves a particular geographic area as a way of making sure that we cover the entire state, and we gear our services to the needs of the various local communities that we serve. So often we collaborate on statewide litigation or on lobbying campaigns on behalf of Connecticut's low-income and vulnerable citizens. So my agencies, Connecticut Legal Services, we're the largest of the three agencies in the state, and we have 7 offices statewide. Our administrative office is in Middletown, and we also have offices in Stamford, Bridgeport, Waterbury, New London, New Britain, and Willimantic. And Greater Hartford Legal Aid covers the Greater Hartford area, and as you might imagine, New Haven Legal Assistance covers the Greater New Haven area. So that's a little bit about who we are. And then in terms of the immigration work specifically, there's, as I'm sure know, there's been a huge increase of immigrants in need. So we haven't finalized the 2018 numbers yet, but in 2016, among the 3 agencies, we opened 255 cases. And in 2017, that number jumped from 255 to 447. So you can see huge increase in demand. And there's also an increase in fear among the immigrant communities, mostly afraid of being deported, but in general, just in fear of what's going to happen to them and their families, given the current atmosphere and the policies in the country. So we also see an increase in asylum applications and in certain special status applications that Jamie and Alexis are going to talk about in a few minutes. But all of these concerns, as you might imagine, also make the immigrant community nervous about coming forward and about being identified as undocumented immigrants. So in response, all of us are increasing our community outreach to make sure that we are visible and welcoming to the immigrant community. And we're doing things as increasing outreach, for example, to Hispanic churches, to community centers, to the soup kitchens, to all the kinds of places where this client population might already have a reason to gather. So we're doing our best to overcome the mistrust that they have of anybody knowing about their undocumented status. And to give you an idea, we have this great need out there, and we have approximately only 10 full-time equivalent attorneys across the state doing free legal services through the legal services agencies for immigrants. So that's a very brief overview. I was told I had maybe up to 5 minutes. I do want to end with an update about the case that Carla referenced earlier, where 2 children were arrested, forcibly taken from their parents and sent by themselves, a 9-year-old boy and a 14-year-old girl, to a shelter in Connecticut. And Connecticut Legal Services came to represent these kids through a grant that we have, federal grant through the VERA agency. We met with the children at the shelter and we brought a lawsuit, a federal lawsuit, first of its kind anywhere in the country, seeking release and reunification of the kids with their parents. And I am very happy to say that within weeks, the families were reunited. And they are now living in the community as legal aid attorneys continue to work with them on their immigrant status. So ending on a bit of an upbeat about those two families in particular, but there are so many others out there. And as you'll hear from Alexis and Jamie, just so many people with needs that we just don't have the capacity to meet. So that is my overview, and Carla, I will turn it back to you.
Great, thank you so much. I apologize, I don't have the order, so could you tell me who is Jamie?
So I think
Alexa.
It's Alexis going next.
Great, thank you so much, Deb. And Alexis, you're up.
Okay, thank you. So again, my name is Alexis Smith, and I am the Executive Director at New Haven Legal Assistance. I just want to kind of give you a brief history of the genesis of our immigration work, and then go into a little bit about the kinds of cases that we take on a regular basis. So we've been representing immigration clients for a number of years, and actually when we first started, it was born out of from an abusive spouse. And what we found is many of those clients were actually immigrants who also needed status relief. So they were essentially caught in these relationships and unable to get out because of their status. They were in fear that they would not be able to work. They were in fear that they would not be able to receive certain benefits. So we started to represent those individuals. And then over the course of the last 2.5 years or so, that work has really expanded. And so we continue to prioritize representing people who are victims of crimes, but we are doing things now, so more our asylum cases, we're doing people who are in what we call removal proceedings, and you may also know those as deportation proceedings. We're representing trafficking victims. So the work has really, really broadened. Debbie talked about the number of cases and how they've increased over the last couple of years. I would also add that having an attorney in immigration court really makes a huge difference for people. There was a study recently done by the American Immigration Council that essentially said that people's ability to succeed in immigration cases where they have a lawyer increases by 5 times in many situations. So the ability to really seek the relief that you need if you have an attorney is really, really critical. And that's really because of the complexity of immigration cases, complexity of the immigration court, why that really makes a difference. Much of the work that we do is essentially providing people with a temporary form of relief, and so that essentially they can be put on a path to citizenship, as we say. So if they're able to become undocumented and have the legal status that they need, eventually they can get their green card, and eventually, if they so desire, become a citizen and remain in the United States. So the first kind of case that I want to talk briefly about, and I should just say that I'm not an immigration attorney, so I don't have that as a specialty. Hopefully I don't get any really complicated questions because I'll have to pump those. But asylum cases are something that we've seen really increase over the last several months and year. And many of you have probably heard about those in the news. And these are individuals who are coming to the United States because they're seeking relief from persecution in their home country because of either race, nationality, in many situations, people who are part of certain social groups, or people who have expressed certain political opinions. So a classic example is someone who may live in a country that's under the rule of a dictatorship, and they, as an individual, have spoken out against that dictator, or have joined a group that has spoken out and criticized that particular regime. And so they have been victimized or are in fear of being victimized as a result of that. And so they come to the United States seeking that relief. These cases can be very complicated for a number of reasons. Many times people are asked to tell their story of this victimization. So people are really telling very personal situations, not only to us as their lawyers, but we have to prepare them to speak in immigration court or in front of someone from United States Citizenship and Immigration Services, otherwise known as USCIS. And so that can be very difficult for someone who has suffered the kinds of trauma that we see on a regular basis with those clients. Another tricky thing about asylum cases is many times you have to show and demonstrate what the conditions in a particular country happen to be. So another example is someone who may live in a place where gang violence is really, really rampant, and that the gangs have really imposed a fear in people who live there. And so you may not be able to send your children to school, or you may not feel comfortable going to work. And so an expert witness can come in and kind of testify about what those conditions are, the history of those gangs, how that's so pervasive, and how it impacts the people who live there. And what we've seen in our office, many times we're able to find those individuals who can testify on behalf of our client on a pro bono basis. But sometimes a client may come from a country that is a little bit more obscure. And so we're having to kind of incur some costs to find those expert witnesses. And so we've talked about that as a network in terms of figuring out how to cover some of those situations. So one example of a case we had within the last year is a mom of three who actually came from a country in Central America, and she was a victim of domestic violence, and so were her children. And so she came here seeking asylum. And so with asylum claims, you can not only seek asylum for yourself, but you can also seek for either a spouse or your children. So we were able to represent her and successfully get asylum for both she and her three children. The second kind of case I also want to speak about is what are known as special immigrant juvenile status. And I'm not sure many people have heard about this kind of case. But again, this is something that you would file with USCIS, and it has kind of multiple levels to it, unlike some other immigration cases. So these are for individuals who are under the age of 21, who are currently living in the United States, and who have either been abused or neglected or abandoned by their families. So these are also situations where, again, we're hearing very, very personal stories of victimization. So if you can imagine, a 12-year-old child who has been abandoned by their family, or someone even younger who's been abused or neglected. And so the multi-step process in these cases is first you have to get sort of a certification, if you will, from your state court that says, in fact, someone has been abused or neglected. And so you may have child who was removed from a home by the local Department of Children and Families because of abuse or neglect. Or you may have a situation where someone came here with their parents, and their parents went back to the home country or has left to go to another state. And so what do you do with these children? And so there's certain relief that they can achieve. And so once you get that certification from your particular state that says, in fact, the child has been abused, neglected, or abandoned, then you can go into immigration court and seek this special status, special immigrant juvenile status. And so these children may be in a couple of different situations. They may be in foster care. They may be living with other family members who happen to be in the United States, who were not necessarily a part of the children's parents' lives, but live, someplace different. And sort of the status that immigration court uses is that it's not in the best interest of that particular child to go back to their home country and live with their parents. So it's really about a safety issue, which is, I think, the situation that many of our clients happen to be in. The last two types of cases I'll talk about. One, I know Connecticut Legal Services is doing a lot of work around this, and these are representing individuals who are victims of trafficking. And I think many people are really surprised who live in Connecticut, the degree to which trafficking actually is occurring here in our state. I think more and more people are becoming aware of it. But these are individuals who have either been victims of sex trafficking or labor trafficking. And so sex trafficking is people who are, being forced to perform certain acts against their will. And labor trafficking are people who, if you look at the definition of labor trafficking, they use terms like involuntary servitude, like slavery. So these are really, really significant situations that people are in. And so these victims can actually apply for a certain kind of visa from USCIS to remain here in the United States for a period of time, again, with the goal of becoming a permanent resident or becoming a citizen eventually. And so I think more and more awareness is happening around trafficking and helping trafficking victims. The last area that I'll talk about really briefly are people who are in removal proceedings, or what's more commonly known as deportation proceedings. And we've, I think as a network, been doing more and more of this because of what Debbie referenced, the fear that people have of being deported. So these are individuals who essentially it's come to light to USCIS that people are here illegally. And it can either be because someone's visa has expired or because they've engaged in certain criminal activity and now they're kind of put on the radar for USCIS. And so they can now initiate a process, the government initiates a process to have that individual deported. And a lot of people ask, well, how do you get on ICE's radar? How does it come to light that you're actually here illegally? Some of you may be familiar with the number of workplace raids that have happened around the country. So this is where ICE goes into workplaces where they suspect that there's a lot of undocumented workers, and they go there and just start picking people up. One relatively recent trend that started to happen that's very concerning are ICE agents who are going into courthouses now, both criminal and civil court. And so there was a recent case a number of months ago where a woman had filed a restraining order. This was not in Connecticut, but in another state, had filed a restraining order against her abusive spouse. And she was undocumented. The abusive spouse let ICE know that she was going to be there, and they came and actually detained her. And that's very concerning when you think about someone who is in that kind of situation, who is seeking relief from the court, and now that's all jeopardized with her being able to receive that relief. So those are a couple of different ways. And so with removal, it can be a lengthy process. What you're essentially trying to demonstrate is that perhaps ICE has made a mistake, and that the criminal, if it's a criminal activity situation, the type of criminal activity they're alleging didn't actually occur. You may be able to get some form of relief while the deportation is happening. So if someone has a pending asylum case or some other kind of visa application that they're in the process of obtaining, if that happens and that's successful while deportation process is pending, that may also be a defense to deportation. And again, we're seeing just more and more of those cases. One thing that we're also doing is we're actually going to some of the detention facilities, which the closest ones in Connecticut are actually in Massachusetts, to Connecticut or in Massachusetts. And so we've been going there for people who are actually detained currently, meeting with them, doing intakes on the spot, and working with them as they navigate that process. So that's generally some of the work that we've been doing over the last several years, and will continue to do, I think, as long as the need is there. So thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Alexis. And Jamie, can you finish?
Yeah, thank you. I'm Jamie Bell. I'm the Executive Director of Greater Hartford Legal Aid. And I'm going to continue our discussion of various immigration-related legal remedies by talking at length, a little more length, about two legal strategies to help achieve stability and safety for families that are already in Connecticut, or who are in Connecticut and have been here for a while. As you've heard already, the combination of lack of legal status and being a victim of violence creates extreme peril for many of the clients that we work with. Most of the clients that we work are in that situation. But having a lawyer who knows how to navigate the legal remedies is often the only way that these victims of violence have a chance to survive. You've also heard from all of us that our brands don't have the resources to help everyone who needs our help. So we do have to identify priority clients and priority situations in order to know how to make decisions about who we will help, unfortunately. So our priorities are really that we will represent and try to help victims of crime, and those are often victims of domestic violence or sexual assault. So I'm going to talk about, as I said, two other key strategies that we can employ and that have been remedies that all of our programs have used for some decades, maybe a decade and a half or more, which are, as both my colleagues have mentioned, they're paths to legal status. There are routes that people who are here in the state without status can pursue to try to achieve legal permanent residence or citizenship. So the first one I'm going to talk about is another form of visa relief. Alexa talked about trafficking visas, the T visas, and I'm going to talk about U visas. It's an alphabet soup of visas, some of them, but this is another one. And this is an immigrant visa for certain victims of crime who are eligible to apply for this visa because they have participated in the investigation and prosecution of a crime. So it must be brought by a victim of a qualifying crime, and usually that is abusive sexual contact, rape, sexual assault, domestic violence, sexual exploitation, stalking, and trafficking, the kinds of victimization that our clients, unfortunately, being very low income, being out of status, often being subject to control by family members and others, are prey to. The other key elements, in addition to being a victim of a crime, are that you have a certification from a law enforcement agency that you're helpful to the prosecution of the crime, you're helpful in the investigation and pursuing the perpetrator. And the last one is, the criteria is that the victim has suffered substantial physical harm or severe emotional abuse as a result of the crime. The benefits of a U visa are great. You can stay in the US for years with such a visa. You can get employment authorizations. You can work legally. Eventually, after some years, you can apply for legal permanent resident status, which is commonly known as green card status. And you can also include relatives, certain relatives in your petition. The law enforcement agencies that have certified that the victim of crime pursuing a U visa has been cooperative are like local police departments, the state's attorney's office, the Department of Children and Families. ICE itself can certify cooperation by a crime victim, the FBI, the Department of Labor, and a few other specified state and local, state and federal agencies. I'm going to give you just an example of a client of ours who was a pretty representative situation for a U visa applicant. Our client, Carmen, it's not her real name, had fled extreme poverty and violence in El Salvador. She met a partner here whom she thought would be supportive and a partner to her, but he eventually became very abusive and emotionally and physically, and was sometimes functional, usually during the weekdays, but extremely violent on the weekends when he was drinking. She put up with living this way, extreme abuse, regularly for 10 years until he finally broke some of her bones and was arrested, at which point our client lost her job. They both became homeless, but the police then became involved in prosecuting the crime. So Carmen cooperated, and she eventually obtained the U visa, and after the requisite number of years was able to achieve green card, LPR status, and is now safe and working to reunite with her children who had been left behind in her home country. So as you can see, U-Visa is a very, very important strategy that we can employ for victims of crimes, not always domestic violence, any kinds of crimes in the community, crimes in any in the workplace, any place where people are victimized of certain crimes can utilize the federal remedy of trying to achieve a U-Visa and achieve both safety and stability that way. The second strategy that our offices have long implemented is a very kind of a bread and butter legal remedy that all of our organizations employ is called a self-petition under the Violence Against Women Act, which we shorten to VAWA because it's a handful to say, a mouthful to say Victims Violence Against Women Act each time. So VAWA self-petitions are what I'm going to talk about. Again, a federal law that allows people who cannot achieve legal status through their partners, usually because of their being abusive, controlling, and while they might be able to try to achieve status for a spouse or a child or a parent, are not doing so as a method of continuing to victimize and control a partner. So VAWA self-petitions are in lieu of family-based petitions. If you normally have the ability to, if you're a citizen, apply on behalf of your spouse or children, but if you're not doing so for some reason having to do with victimization and control, then a VAWA self-petition is available to certain people. Again, there are very specific requirements. It has to be in the marriage context, so that therefore many people who are in a relationship that doesn't include a legal marriage are not able to take advantage of this route to status. But good faith marriages to citizens, to green card holders who are battered and subject to extreme cruelty during the marriage, they have to have resided together, and the self-petitioner has to be of good moral character. So these are all elements that need to be proved by the lawyer representing the person. The benefits, again, like a U-Visa, are very great and help to achieve safety and stability. You don't need the cooperation of the abuser. Obviously, that's one of the key elements of it. You may be eligible for certain public benefits. If you achieve status under a VAWA self-petition, you can work, achieve employment authorization, and then eventually, like other visas, you can, like other routes rather, you can apply to become a legal permanent resident and eventually a citizen if all of the steps work out. A very typical example of a person who is able to apply for status using the VAWA self-petition route is our client Natasha. She came to the U.S. as an adolescent to join family here. She eventually grew up and married a U.S. citizen husband she thought would be a life partner for her. After a few years and the birth of their daughter, he began to constantly rage and abuse her severely. He also refused to file the family petition for her so that she could get legal status. Again, part of it was as a way to control her. Finally, during one assault, Natasha defended herself and they were both arrested. Then the court system involved. She tried again for a very long time, including using court intervention programs through the state court system to stop the abuse and to achieve safety. And that also proved impossible and led to a DV shelter here in Connecticut. The DV shelter then referred her to us, knowing because we had been able to educate shelters about some of these strategies that Natasha might be able to take advantage of self-petition as a way to achieve safety and stability for herself. And we were successful in getting her a VAWA self-petition. As I said, this is a very basic bread and butter. This is how many of our programs started representing immigrants, because it flowed out of our domestic violence advocacy and our advocacy for women who, usually women, but not always, sometimes men as well, who were fleeing abusive relationships. This client is now a legal permanent resident and resides here safely with her child. As you can see, both of these remedies, U-Visas and VAWA self-petitions, have a life-changing impact on people whose status as victims of crime, usually domestic violence, but not always, makes them unable to achieve safety and stability on their own. They can then raise their children safely, they can work, they can eventually try to legalize status and become productive and contributing members of their communities. So that's writing up the kinds of strategies that are the very, very core basic strategies that we in legal service are able to achieve for immigrant people out of status who, for varying reasons, fall within our priorities of our programs.
Great, thanks very much, Jamie, Alexis, and Debbie. As I know that's a lot of information that was just kind of put out to folks, but we thought we could open it up for some questions right now. If you have a question, as I mentioned, you can type it right into the chat box, which should come up at the bottom of your screen. And I think we have one or two. Esther is going to start asking the questions.
If you, good afternoon, everyone. If you just type, if you don't see the chat box to the right of your screen, if you just move your mouse down to the bottom of your Zoom screen, you'll see a little bubble that says chat. And if you click on that, the chat box should pop up to your right. And you can type in your question right there and it'll come directly to me. So while we're waiting for a few questions to pop up there, I wanted to put out to the three executive directors a couple of questions that came up during some of our conversations in planning for this webinar. The first is, what are some of the myths that you have encountered about the populations you are serving? You're working directly with these families, young folks, so you have some insight into them, and in working with other folks either connected to their legal services or immigration services, what are some of the myths that you encounter in your work? And Alexis, Deb, or Jamie, either one of you, please feel free to answer.
This is Debbie, and you were asking what are some of the myths that we encounter. You know, I think some of the myths are that these are people who are just somehow looking for an easy life or a handout. It's not unlike some of the myths that were swirling around earlier welfare recipients. I think people who perpetuate the myths have no idea of the horrors that these people are escaping from, for example, when they're coming to seek asylum. I think they don't factor in what that arduous journey is like and how horrible it must be in their home country to put up with the journey to get here. And I think these people are really resilient and hardworking and have to have made it as far as they did. So I would say that that's a big myth that we sometimes encounter, not from people working to help the folks, but from people who are putting up barriers to their getting some kind of legal status here.
I'll just jump in. This is Jamie. This is a slightly different looking at the myths, but I thought it would be helpful for people in the philanthropic community to know that another myth that is out there is amongst immigrant population itself. That is that there are no remedies for any of the other kinds of legal problems that they might have, and there really is. If they're out of status, there's really a place they can go for help. So one thing we do in our extensive Know Your Rights and our community legal education events that Debbie and Alexis mentioned is try to get the word to the community that, for instance, if you're being abused by an employer in terms of your wages or your working hours, the remedy that the Department of Labor provides to any worker anywhere in Connecticut are also available to people regardless of status. Many agencies of the state government do not consider themselves, in Connecticut at least, an arm of the federal immigration authorities. They're not concerned about your status, they're concerned about enforcing the laws they exist to enforce. So I think it is a very important strategy that we used when we were working with this population a couple of decades ago to try to dispel myths within the community that there was no place to go and that no government-connected organization would be able to be helpful or would help them to enforce rights or to be protective in any way.
Thank you, Deb. Thank you, Jamie. We do have a couple of questions. I'll pose them, and then I want to move to make sure we have some space for our next group of speakers to share their information. The question is, what is the greatest opportunity to support immigrants with and without status in our state? What new did you prioritize as we go into 2019? Big question.
I have one idea. If you, go ahead, somebody else talk.
I was just going to say one of the biggest opportunities is finding ways to get people who speak the language of the immigrants who are in need. So whether it's interpreters or services that provide interpretation or document translation, or and learning something about the culture and the country that they fled, and about the culture of terror. So all of this is just geared to communication and finding ways to have these people feel a little bit safer and sort of welcomed and safe in coming to us as people who potentially can help them. Jamie, go ahead.
And I was going to, in a very different level, I was just going to suggest that it's really important to, if you can, and it's not something that we can do alone, but everyone can do, to push back against restrictions and constrictions and who can take advantage of certain legal remedies. For instance, there's either it happened or a proposed rule change. I'm afraid actually that it happened, that constricting who can claim domestic violence and as a reason for fleeing a country and trying to claim asylum. That's things that the government, our government, has control over, and it has been a claim that allows people to claim asylum, and it's under threat as a result of some rule changing, and it's very, very extreme and life-threatening change for many of our clients who are really fleeing life-threatening conditions in there, not due to anything that they can do anything about. The law enforcement in many countries does not protect people as we would want them to, and so that it is not a condition that they can change on their own if they stay and return to their countries.
I would just add a little bit to Debbie's point about the language piece, and I think it's really important. Many of the cases that we handle, we don't work on in a vacuum. We rely very heavily on the social service agencies that these clients are working with, and so because they provide not only language and interpretation and translation, but also that ability to really bring the client to the client, and that bridge between sort of recognizing that we're a safe space, that we're there to help. Because I think sometimes people view lawyers maybe either on the other side or not necessarily as helpful as we can be. So I think supporting those organizations and recognizing the role that they play in the legal representation that we provide is really critical.
Great. Well, thank you so much to each of you for participating with us today. We now want to shift the conversation to talk a little bit about how the philanthropic community can respond to be supportive. And we're going to start by hearing from a few people who have been responding to this issue in the philanthropic community. And so we are joined by Judge Robert Holzberg, founder of Connecticut Lawyers for Immigration Justice, Don Phillips, Executive Director of the Connecticut Bar Foundation, and Caprice Taylor Mendez, Strategic Program Manager with the Community Foundation for Greater New Haven.
Hi, everyone. My name is Don Phillips. I'm the Executive Director of the Connecticut Bar Foundation. I wanted to start by talking a little bit about our foundation. Our mission is to further the rule of law and assist in efforts to improve the administration of justice in Connecticut. We serve this mission in part by working to secure a reliable and sufficient flow of funds to support legal services and access to justice for persons of limited means. We have three principal sources of funds, all of which more or less flow from either the government or through state statute. First and foremost, we have been appointed by the judicial branch in the state of Connecticut to be the administrator of a program called Interest on Lawyers' Trust Accounts. this is had been a singular number one source of funding for legal aid, not only in Connecticut, but across the country for many years, until about 2007, 2008, when the economy went south and interest rates with it. And so interest rates were not, had basically dropped to almost zero. And our funding dropped from about 20 million to less than 2 last year. In 2009, a new program, a court fee grant and aid program, was begun. While it didn't completely bring us back to the level, and still hasn't where we were in 2007, it has been a substantial help in terms of our ability to fund legal aid organizations like the 3 you've already heard from. And then we get a small grant, relatively small grant from the judicial branch, a small but important grant from the judicial branch. And all 3 of these sources were required by statute to make grants to nonprofit organizations whose principal purpose is to provide legal services to low-income people. So that's the nutshell of how we get our funding. And we fund 10 legal aid organizations in Connecticut, and we do a technology grant. We fund a technology grant as well. And that grant goes to help keep ctlawhelp.org running. So because of our broad mission, we don't have specific funding identified for any one type of legal problem. We did conduct a couple of legal needs surveys. These were funded primarily by the 3 organizations that whose directors you've just heard from, as well as the Bar Foundation. The most recent one concluded that there were approximately 8 types of problems that were the main problems that low-income people, according to the survey, had. And amongst those 8 was immigration. So back in 2008, immigration was on the radar screen as one of the number, the top 8, if you will, types of problems. So that said, we identify, it's been identified. We need to do another legal needs assessment study, and we hope to do one in 2019. We suspect since 2008, a couple of things have happened. One, again, our funding source has dropped. Our ability to fund these organizations who provide the panoply of services for the various needs, which typically are housing, consumer, employment, family, government benefits, healthcare, and immigration. But since 2008, I think what we will also find in the next legal needs study is that immigration has taken on a more significant role in terms of a more significant need than it did back in 2008. So one way we've been able to address the immigration, the rise of immigration need, is legal services for immigration needs, is through a project that we started last year with another foundation, the Singer Foundation. The Singer Foundation approached us and wanted to know if we would administer a fellowship program. They would fund it. We would do all the work behind the scenes to administer the program. And we absolutely agreed to do this. Long story short, we were able to identify through an application process. We selected 3 recent law school graduates for fellowships, and this is called the Singer Connecticut Public Service Fellowship Program. And each of the program directors whom you've heard, their programs were the qualified host employers for these particular fellows. And 2 of them are performing immigration legal services for, in this case, Greater Hartford Legal Aid and Connecticut Legal Services. This fellowship program wasn't designed specifically to help meet the needs of the for immigration services, but it was a way for us when we were choosing and looking at the projects and that was out there that we certainly did identify a need for help in that area. And so we do have two now recently minted lawyers who are helping with, whose projects are specifically to help these two organizations meet in some way the needs that are out there in the immigrant in the Connecticut's immigrant community, the low-income immigrant community. I think my 5 minutes is probably up.
What are the other ways that the philanthropic community can really support the legal aid firms in their work, in your view?
Well, there are several ways. The legal aid organizations, while we're the #1 funder for legal aid in the state of Connecticut, let me just go back a little bit and say that one of the things that 2008 legal needs assessment study concluded that about 20%, based on the funding we're being able to provide to the legal services communities, and through pro bono services, free legal services, volunteer by attorneys, only about 20% of all legal needs are actually being met. About 10% by the funding and 10% by volunteer attorneys. So in 2008, 80% of all the legal needs of low-income people simply couldn't be met. They're just limited resources. So anything that can help these organizations to increase those resources and therefore increase their capacity to be able to serve more people is critical. Obviously, money is the best way to do it, but the other thing to do is while we don't have like I said, we don't grant specific types of for specific types of needs. We certainly are open to partnering with another funder, as we did with Singer, to provide any kind of assistance programmatic-wise, whether it's specific to a legal need such as immigration, or it's more general. We're looking for opportunities like that, and if it's a good match, we'll certainly extend ourselves and our gratitude to anyone who wants to give me a call or write to me and see if see if we can develop a specific program that would begin to address further the needs of the immigrant community.
Great, thank you so much, Don. Judge Holzberg, have you one more try?
Okay, I'm sorry for the technical difficulties, probably on my end. Anyway, I'm delighted to join you. I'm Robert Holzberg, a retired judge of the Superior Court and currently a partner at Pullman and Conway. As my friends Jamie, Debbie, and Alexis are probably much too tired of me saying and repeating, the genesis for this initiative arose last summer when I think all of us were listening with horror with what was going on at the border in terms of the separation of parents and from children. And so, born out of a sense of frustration and impotence and outrage, I wondered aloud whether there's something that I might do or we could do that would be productive to help those folks in the immigrant community. And simultaneously, the wonderful and ultimately successful lawsuit brought by our friends in the legal aid community was receiving a lot of publicity. So that triggered a thought in my head that maybe there's something we could do to assist the 3 legal aid organizations in Connecticut. I serve on the board of Connecticut Legal Services, so I know how stretched they are in terms of resources and manpower. So I reached out to my colleague and friend, Chase Rogers, who's the former Chief Justice of the Connecticut Supreme Court, and we decided that we would try to launch an initiative geared principally to the members of the bar, although it's spread well beyond that now, to try to raise funds for the three legal service organizations that have been participating in this call today. And so through a lot of legwork and individual calls and letter writing and use of social media and outreach to the media, we have been very successful in, I think, in persuading our colleagues in the legal community to donate significantly to this effort. And I think as we sit here today, there's $100,000 that's been raised over the last few months. It's not a huge sum of money in gross terms, but I think my friends will agree that as once it gets divided up, it will provide some meaningful support for their efforts. And there have been discussions underway. I think some of the monies will be used to help pay for translators. Some of the funds will be used to help assist court fees. And I often tell my friends in the legal community, many of who have had very successful careers, that for us who work in large firms or smaller successful firms, we don't think about writing back to pay for funds to file court claims, nor do we really concern ourselves with what the cost of a translator might be. That's just sort of baked into the cake. But this type of fundraising, I think, and Debbie and Jamie and Alex can speak to us if there's a few minutes left, I think provides a meaningful boost to their efforts. At least we hope so. And so what I learned from this initiative is that there is a tremendous desire to try to be of assistance. I think a lot of folks across the political spectrum, and this has been a absolutely apolitical effort, feel that they want to do something and they need to do something. And so we were lucky that we sort of put our toes in the water at the right time, and this effort has resonated. And it's actually spread, I think, well beyond the bar, and folks who've heard about it have made contributions. And in fact, yesterday, I received a very, very wonderful surprise. A colleague of mine who's counsel to a prominent trust fund is called to see if they could make a donation, because it's that time of year. It's December now, and they want to get the charitable contributions in. So I guess my takeaway message in terms of the philanthropic community, which of course you know much better than I, is that it certainly helps to have a cause that resonates, that has emotional appeal, and for which people can make tangible contributions. So I think my 2 minutes must be up, so I'll yield to Caprice if she's now available.
Great, thank you so much, Judge Holzberg. I just wanted to share a little bit, because we haven't been able to address the issue with Caprice's phone line. I did want to mention to people that that Caprice has really been leading a funder collaborative, the Immigration Strategic Funders Collaborative for Connecticut, which is at the Community Foundation for Greater New Haven. And this collaborative has been and is committed to enhancing statewide efforts and local work to support Connecticut's immigrant families, workers, and students. They've done some work around promoting the understanding of the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, DACA, to increase access for undocumented immigrants to full spectrum of immigration services, in this case, often legal services. They've been working to strengthen advocacy efforts at the local and state levels. And recently, relatively, a significant grant from the Bar Foundation for work. So if people have questions about kind of ongoing funder collaboratives focused on immigration rights and services, Caprice, excellent person to talk to. That just as a kind of final wrap-up question, we could ask the speakers who are on the line if they could give us just their kind of a parting, their parting thoughts around what's the thought you want funders on this call to leave. And I don't know. You're all unmuted, so if you want to, if you're ready to go, if you want to jump in, that would be great.
I would. This is Jamie. I would just say that I think a key message I'd like people to receive is that small amounts of monetary investment and potentially time investment as well. If you, for instance, are bilingual and can help with interpreting or translating documents, that's a huge help as well. But small amounts of investment can yield enormous results for families and our clients in these situations. The ability to pay for the fee to get your work authorization means that you can work and you can feed your family and you can maintain stable housing and keep your kids in school, like a lifetime of benefits. So, you know, that's a couple $100 and it makes a lifetime of possibility and opportunity for an immigrant client.
Yeah, I would agree. This is Debbie. It's easy to feel like the problem is overwhelming. Jamie's absolutely right that a small amount can make a big difference. And I also know that Jamie and Alexis and I really want to thank Judge Holtzberg and former Chief Justice Chase Rogers also for their work with the Immigrant Lawyering Campaign Fund, because as Judge Holtzberg said, it really will make a difference and does make a difference in our ability to work with immigrants. And we're very grateful for what the two of them have done for us and for our clients.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much.
So I would echo that gratitude, absolutely. One thing that I would add is that I've been really amazed. I've been in this position about 2 years, and when I first started, I got a lot of calls, a lot of interest from people who wanted to volunteer in our office, who wanted to support us in various ways, because of a lot of things that were happening through this administration. And I think one thing that I found is that a lot of people had their individual interests, whether it was immigration or something else. And I think when people were really educated about all of the work that we do within legal services, their eyes were really opened. So I think just to kind of echo Jamie's point that an investment in the work that we do really can yield a lot of results for a lot of these families. We may be working with an immigrant client who also has a whole host of other needs that we're able to address because of the holistic services that we provide, which I think is unique as opposed to a lot of other organizations.
I also just want to echo my colleagues in thanking Judge Holtzberg and Chief Justice Rogers for the Immigrant Lawyers Initiative, and also call out my local community foundation, the Hartford Foundation for Community. Hartford Foundation for its support for GHLA's immigrant-related.
Great. Don or Judge Holtzberg, do you have any parting thoughts?
Just that these initiatives are important, and I'm delighted that you convened this meeting, because I think all of us have to continue to think about how to reach out to get the support that we need to do the job as best we can.
And Don?
Yeah, I would simply just echo what the prior four speakers just said. There have been study after study after study that donations made to legal aid organizations across the country return many more times the value of the donation. The social return on investment with legal aid groups can approach double-digit figures in many cases. So it's a good place to, if you're looking to really have your donation dollars have that great ripple effect and make a big impact. Legal aid groups such as Connecticut Legal Services, Greater Hartford Legal Aid, and New Haven Legal Assistance are terrific places to look to.
Great. Well, I want to thank all of our speakers today. We're grateful that you lent your time today, and even more appreciative of the work that you're doing here every day in Connecticut. So many thanks to you, and many thanks to our participants for joining this important conversation. I hope everybody has a great day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.